Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Penguin Random House and United for Libraries on-demand session, Book Club Strengthening Community and Celebrate Diversity. We're going to begin with a discussion on diversity in library programming, and then hear from an exciting panel of authors whose books are excellent examples of literature that will inspire dialogue in your community. I'm Sharon Fason, Adult Services Librarian from Chicago Public Library.
And I'm Alison Escoto, the head librarian at the Center for Fiction. Thanks so much for tuning in. So we're going to discuss today how book clubs celebrate diversity and strengthen community. We're going to share a couple of examples from our respective institutions of excellent book groups. And we're also going to share some best practices and a couple of resources. Actually, do you mind going back a few slides? Okay, so how do book clubs achieve celebrating diversity and strengthening their communities? The answer to this question is a little different for every community, just as libraries serve varied populations. But there are a few universal ways in which book clubs can achieve this. One of the ways that immediately springs to mind happened just this past year. Everyone was isolated and quarantined, and people were longing for a community. And the Center for Fiction, like every library, had to pivot to online programming and book discussions. And one of our most popular programs were these online book discussions. People like to, in general, convene over a shared interest, and book groups offer that opportunity. One of the added circumstances that made book discussion groups so appealing is that we were all isolated, and we were able to convene together from groups that didn't normally get a chance to attend book discussion groups because of Zoom and because of the virtual access. We were able to reach communities and widen the scope of people who could join us. And that was a really important way to strengthen the community because we were able to invite more people in. And book groups give you that opportunity to meet people who you might not otherwise encounter. And that was definitely true for virtual book discussions. In terms of celebrating diversity, book groups offer the opportunity to examine and study different perspectives and cultures through fiction or nonfiction, and then sharing thoughts and reactions to those perspectives. Book groups really enrich the experience of reading, which itself is already a very enriching activity. There are so many possibilities for diversity in book discussion groups, whether it's the reading material itself or the opportunity to gather a diverse group together from within the community to meet each other. So I think we're ready to show you some examples of exceptional book clubs, and I'd love for Sharon to share some of the Chicago Public Library's offerings.
Thanks, Alison. Well, the first example of an exceptional diverse book group is the Chicago Public Library's Assisted Resource Center, better known as ARC. It provides an array of resources, services, and materials for individuals experiencing disabilities. The unit also provides support to senior adults and individuals experiencing limited English proficiency. The host of the accessible audio book discussion group is Patrice Johnson, our ARC librarian. She stated that meetings are designed to eliminate barriers for individuals with low tech skills that may experience difficulty navigating popular platforms such as Zoom, WebEx, GoToMeetings, etc., yet want to participate in virtual book discussions. ARC conducts a variety of virtual programming, including a bi-monthly phone-in virtual book discussion meeting. The original plan was to have the meeting once a month as a solution to no longer providing in-person programming during the 2020 pandemic restrictions. However, in response to the demand of members, the meeting increased to twice a month. Several members were surprisingly transparent and shared how the opportunities to connect with others really helped them combat the side effects of the loss of social interaction and depression. The duration of the book discussion is 1 hour and 30 minutes. Members are welcome to join within a 30-minute window prior to start of the meeting to chat and catch up with each other. This has been very beneficial as members have used this time to share helpful resources and interesting news. As the restrictions for meeting in person have continued, the focus of the book selections for 2021 season for this discussion group has been on empowerment and uplifting reads. The group has had dynamic conversations on a wide range of pivotal books, including Year of Yes, The Giver of Stars, 10% Happier, the Stationary Group, and Unbowed. Next slide. Okay. Another great example is the Carter Woodson Regional Library Reading Circle on social justice. This is a new community-based book discussion group that focuses on a variety of Black culture from a scholarly perspective. The monthly reading circle features accomplished guests from the community to lead the book talk. The current theme is social justice. This past May 18th, special guest Alderman Howard B. Brookins Jr. discussed Chokehold by Paul Butler. A chokehold powerfully demonstrates why current efforts to reform law enforcement will not create lasting change. The host of the adult services librarian LaWanda Miller stated that programming during COVID can be challenging, but staff must have an open mind and offer a variety of programming like Grab and Go Kids book clubs, DIY, and film discussions. Okay. Next, my next book club group is the ESL Virtual Korean Book Discussion at Albany Park Branch, led by Young Park. Young Park pioneered the ESL Book Discussion Group at the Albany Park Branch in 2017. This program has expanded to 5 other neighborhood branches. The Albany Park has ESL Book Discussion meeting every third Thursday of the month from 4 to 5. Albany Park has a book buddy system, which pairs an ESL teacher and an ESL student to read the month's title together to join the monthly book discussion meeting. Young matches the pair, but they arrange time, frequency, and meeting place beyond their individual situation and interest by themselves. The ESL Book Club connects to other CPL incentive programs, including our One Book, One Chicago, Community Cinema, and the Celebrating Heritage committees. During the year, you'll see them reading The Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens, the Joy Luck Club during Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month, and Frankenstein, which joins with the sci-fi One Book, One Chicago theme. Young also partners with other community adult literacy organizations, inviting other ESL students and organizers to the ESL book discussion as well. Young converted the in-person ESL book discussion meeting to the virtual meeting using a Zoom platform during COVID pandemic. The ESL book club members wanted to connect to each other to help to keep the book discussion active virtually during the pandemic. It was hard to distribute books, but once we reopened, everything went back to normal. Young resumed the ESL book discussion, and the book buddies resumed their meeting virtually as well after we opened. Young stated that the virtual ESL book program has provided digital literacy training, invited old ESL book members to whom moved to Turkey and other countries. It's invited new members from all over the world, from Korea, Spain, and Mexico, and it's invited community organizers and from neighborhood adult literacy organizations virtually using PowerPoint and other videos like Zoom. Okay, and my next book club group, which I belong to, is called the BYOB, which is better known as Bring Your Own Book Club. It's located at Sherman Park. The Chicago Public Library reopened to the public in June 2020 after closing in March due to COVID-19. All programming was moved to virtual due to COVID-19. So Lala, which is the host, started a virtual Bring Your Own Book Club, a book discussion on Zoom where participants could talk about any book. So each participant has up to 5 minutes to talk about their book, and afterwards, Lala emails us to a list of all the books presented and a link that directs us to the books on BiblioCommons. Our group of 12 women is very diverse in age and race. Ages of members range from 20s to 80s, and race includes Asian, African American, and white. Some members read titles that are recommended by other members. In March discussion, I remember one member said to another member who happens to be of another race, like, "Oh my God, we read the same type of books. That's so cool." So it's brought together many people. Our discussions are very lively. Book selections include fiction, nonfiction, classics, bestsellers, and self-help. Some titles have been reported, include The House on Mango Street, The Christmas Carol, Heavy, An American Memoir, and Mrs. Lincoln's Dressmaker. So Lala recommends librarians to recruit a friend, family member, or a librarian to help get a new discussion started. She also says, offer to register participants for next discussions and send them a reminder email 5 days before discussions. Collect patron email addresses and send them registration links to your book discussions. Or, just start a book discussion Facebook group and invite your Facebook friends.
Thank you so much, Sharon. Those are amazing groups, and I really wish I could join all of them. So I'd like to talk about a few examples from the Center for Fiction to really highlight how you can diversify the book discussions themselves. The reading groups at the center are a little different in that they are structured as series, and we do charge for some of these reading groups while also offering some for free. And they can range in length from 4 to 8 sessions, and the groups are centered around a common theme, or they're centered around a particular author, or it's a group reading of one really big book. So think Moby Dick or The Master and Margarita, very large classic novels that you would read together. So one way to jazz up your book groups might be to have them offered as a series like this. With the themed book clubs, there is so much potential for diversity, and there's so much potential for talking about a lot of different diverse topics. And the first one that I want to highlight is one that we offered last fall to great success, and it was called Freaks of Nature, Queer Myth, Monsters, and Magic. This thematic book discussion group not only examined different queer perspectives in fiction, but it also offered a diverse array of books within that framework. So 2 examples of what they read in this 4-week series are pictured here. One is a classic autobiography of Red by Anne Carson, and the other is a contemporary book by a Nigerian-American author, Akweke Mezi. So consider centering a book group around a unifying theme and compare and contrast different books from different genres. Next slide. Criminal Justice in Fiction is a group that's actually still ongoing at the center. We offered it this spring, and the central theme here is in the name. A great idea for a potential diverse reading list is to examine how fiction or nonfiction tackles a social justice issue. In 2020, the center received a grant to celebrate Ernest J. Gaines's classic novel, A Lesson Before Dying. And as part of the programming surrounding that grant, we structured this group around not only reading this particular novel, but also exploring how other contemporary books examined the themes that Gaines wrote about. This also exhibits diversity, and then it mixes with classics and contemporary fiction. And it's a great idea to have a book discussion group that centers around a classic, because many people often say that they wish they could read, a big book with other people to increase their understanding. And a classic work is always going to be read differently by different generations. And it's really great to have a discussion with people and see how that is. And that leads me to my next example. Next slide. Beyond the Tropes, Race and African American Character in Speculative Fiction. I chose this reading group as an example because I feel that it mixed a lot of diverse elements: classic and contemporary fiction, social justice issues, discussions, genre writing, and re-examining classics through a modern lens. I thought of this particular group because it has a lot of separate elements that would work with planning your own groups. They speak to different types of diversity. So really, I would advise you to consider starting a genre book discussion group. Every community has genre fiction fans, whether it's sci-fi, fantasy, romance, mystery, and these genres, there's a lot to talk about within these books. So they kind of get ignored when it comes to like really discussing them. And I think revisiting those genres is a great idea to reach a variety of different readers in your community. So now that we've offered some examples from our institutions, let's talk about best practices for building communities, celebrating diversity, and promoting inclusion through literature. So take the temperature of your community. What I mean by this is to pay attention to what members of your community are interested in. See what's circulating, see what people are requesting, send out a survey to your patrons to see what they would respond to when you're talking about forming a book discussion group. Talk to your super readers, see what they're reading. Find out if there's a partner organization, a community organization that you can partner with to have a book discussion group. Because this way you might reach members of your community who might not be library users yet, but who would respond to something like a book discussion group. Then you'll have a basis for your future planning.
Oh, and also encourage and create system-wide culture heritage book clubs. At Chicago Public Library, each month we have a different group. We celebrate different groups. So one month I'll have a book displaying or have a book discussion about disability awareness. During Latinx Heritage Month, I think we'll be reading Mexican Gothic. So select different, if you can do a celebrate system-wide, do that. That's really a good way to celebrate diversity.
Expand your own reading lists. This should go without saying, but just in case, the more widely you read, the more you'll be open to different and diverse ideas for your patrons and to bring to book discussion groups. Take a look, for example, at what you've read in the last year. Do you notice any gaps there? Are there any authors that you haven't really explored? Are there any genres that you haven't explored? Take the temperature of your own reading list and fill in those gaps to expand it.
Okay. It's also good to just create bibliographies that promote diverse authors and genres. I've created a book list on BiblioCommons. I've created a list and put them on bookmarkers, created flyers with Afrofuturism books, like a new book from like Remote Control and all the cool books from Octavia Butler. I might just have a whole list about, Afrofuturism. That's really fun, and it gets people exposed to different groups, multicultural groups, special collections.
Yeah. And then finally, make discussions interactive and inclusive. People like to feel like they've contributed. So open up book groups to suggestions from your members on what to read next. That way you will end up just naturally with a diverse selection of reads for your group. Sharon's BYO book group is an amazing example of that. The monthly reading group that I lead has an actual name, the Librarians, and members of the Librarians love to be part of this gang, the Librarians. It's a fun way to make people feel that that they're members of something. And that way they'll want to return again and again.
True.
So we have highlighted 4 resources for you to find your next diverse read, although there are so many out there. These are just a couple of exceptional ones. The first one is Library-Reads, which for those of you who aren't familiar, let me just tell you quickly about them. Library-Reads is a nonprofit group that started in 2013 by a group of 12 librarians to create a list of recommended reads as voted on by public library staff. 8 years later and going strong, this is one of the most democratic readers advisory tools out there. And it's a great resource not only for forthcoming titles, but it has a great backlist of selections for you to choose from. And Library-Reads is going to be starting their own book discussion group in July, so keep an eye out for that. And NPR's Book Concierge. National Public Radio puts out their Book Concierge every year around late November, early December. It's usually my favorite day of the year because they have a beautiful layout of selections that their staff and their book critics have picked as exceptional books from the year. They even have, it's beautifully laid out. You just really have to check it out at that link there. They have a section called Book Club Ideas. So there you go. It's ready-made for you.
Great. Another great list is each year, Goodreads provides a long list of anticipated literary reads by people of color. Back for the 9th year, this is a list of adult literary books with a 2021 initial publication date that will appeal to literary readers of color and readers who enjoy stories with a multicultural point of view. So check that list out. And the next list, another great resource is the LGBTQ Reads. This resource covers only books that have a point of view of characters that belong under the LGBTQIAP+ umbrella.
Great. So feel free to contact us. Here's our email addresses if you'd like to share some of your ideas, or if you have any questions for us, you're welcome to contact us. And that completes our presentation on programming. Next up, we're going to introduce you to Daphne Andreadus, author of Brown Girls, Chibundu Onuzo, author of Sankofa, Qian Julie Wang, author of Beautiful Country, and Tiphanie Yanique, author of Monster in the Middle. We're looking forward to learning more about their forthcoming novels.
It's our pleasure to introduce our panel today. Daphne Andreadus was born and raised in Queens, New York. She holds an MFA from Columbia University, where she was awarded a Henfield Prize and a creative writing teaching fellowship. She is the recipient of a Bread Loaf Writers Conference scholarship, among other honors. Brown Girls is her first novel and will be published by Random House on January 4th, 2022.
Chibundu Onuzo was born in Lagos, Nigeria, and lives in London. A fellow of the Royal Society of Literature and a regular contributor to The Guardian, she is the winner of a Betty Trask Award and has been shortlisted for the Dylan Thomas Prize, the Commonwealth Book Prize, and the RSL Encore Award, and has been longlisted for the Desmond Elliott Prize and the Edisalat Literature Prize. The author of Welcome to Lagos, Sankofa is her third novel and will be published by Catapult on October 5th.
Qian Julie Wang is a graduate of Yale Law School and Swarthmore College. Formerly a corporate litigator, she is now managing partner of a firm dedicated to advocating for education and discrimination rights. Her writing has appeared in major publications such as New York Times and the Washington Post. She lives in Brooklyn with her husband and her 2 rescue dogs, Salty and Peppers. Her memoir, Beautiful Country, will be published by Doubleday on September 7th.
And Tiphanie Yanique is the author of our award-winning novel, Land of Love and Drowning, as well as the poetry collection, Wife. Winner of the 2014 Center for Fiction First Novel Award and a National Book Foundation 5 Under 35 honoree. She has also received a Rona Jaffe Award and a Fulbright Scholarship. Her short fiction has been published in The New Yorker and anthologized in Best American Short Stories 2020. Originally from the Virgin Islands, she now lives in Atlanta, where she is a professor at Emory University. Her new novel, Monster in the Middle, will be published by Riverhead Books on October 19th. Thank you, everyone, for being with us today. Librarians are very excited to hear about your new books. And I'd like to start off the conversation by asking if each of you could say a little bit about your new books and what readers can expect from it. Tiphanie, can we start with you?
Hi, good morning, everyone. I know folks will be listening to this at a different time, but it's morning where we are. I'm so glad to be with you. I realize that I'm kind of the senior on the panel, and I just wanted to say how thrilled I am to read these new books that are coming out. Some of you guys this is your first book, so exciting. Daphne, it's so good to see your face again. And Chibundu, it's nice to meet you. Qian, it's nice to see you. I'm very excited. I'm not used to being a senior. It's nice though. So welcome. I am really excited about this new book, and I'm excited to be in this panel with librarians. I come from a long line of librarians. My mother and my grandmother were both librarians. And in fact, the library back home in St. Thomas, where I'm from, the children's section is being renamed in my grandmother's honor. So I'm really dedicated to libraries and to librarians in particular. My new book, Monster in the Middle, is a book about the history of intimacy. And it takes two characters who are meeting for the first time, and it asks us to think about this thing that we call baggage that happens between two people. What is that really about? How do we come to understand who we are? How do we come to be able to share that with another person? And my premise is that we learn who we are based on the stories that we've been told about who we are, as well as the stories that we tell ourselves about who we are. And so each character, we follow them, we see what their stories from their early childhood, from their adolescence have taught them about themselves, but we also see their parents and their grandparents. The idea being, you meet a person, you see their physical self, you know their private stories, what they tell you, but behind of them is a whole train of history. And you're also meeting that history. The stories also traverse the whole United States, including the non-continental United States. And it's as much about what it means to be an individual in a community as much as it is about what it means to be an American, and different kinds of Americanness. What it means to be American now, what it might have meant in the 60s, what it might have meant in the 1940s, and how we come to our current Americanness.
Thank you so much. Qian, would you like to go next?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me here today. I'm thrilled especially to be with librarians, just as Tiphanie said, because libraries and library books hold a special place in my heart. In 1994, I moved to New York City from China. I was 7 years old at the time, and for years thereafter, I lived in undocumented status and poverty with my parents. I had never seen people of different races. I had never been away from my extended family. I had never not been home. So when I came here, libraries and library books and the characters they held became my home and my family, and they really did get me through. The title, Beautiful Country, is a direct translation of the Chinese word for America, which is Meiguo. And the book is told from my childhood perspective. So in writing it, I traveled back in time almost and walked in my childhood shoes again, seeing everything anew, both through child and adult lens. I learned English all over again on just about every library book I could get my hands on. I felt again the weight of metal scissors that I used in the Chinatown sweatshop. I could smell the salmon as my mom worked in the sushi processing plant, where her hands turned purple from being soaked in ice water for hours at a time. And I could see the lights of Fifth Avenue during Christmas for the very first time again, falling in lust once more with New York City and the promise of the American dream. People often ask me what message I want readers to take away from my book, but I think of my memoir not as a message, but as a journey, not a letter, but a train ride. Beautiful Country is at bottom an exploration of what it means to make a home. And perhaps even more than an immigrant narrative, it's a return to that wondrous and terrifying time of childhood, back to that time when we were still all tender and open. It's a voyage into the love and secrets of family, a flight into the confusion and delight of coming of age. So in the vein of Angela's Ashes, which made me laugh through its heartache, Beautiful Country embarks on a very special excursion into the childhood wounds, love, and laughter that still form the indelible core of our adult selves. So I hope you'll all join me on that journey. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Next up, Chibundu, would you like to tell us a little bit about your forthcoming novel?
Yes, hi everyone. Great to be here at something directed at libraries because I love libraries. If you've ever been broke, you know that libraries are very important, and I was broke many times in my 20s. So yes, libraries are the best. So Sankofa is my latest novel. The main character, Anna, is in her 40s and she's 48 when her mother dies. And she was raised by her mother, a single mother, and she's also separated from her husband. So she's in this sort of limbo phase of her life. And she discovers some letters that she discovers a diary that her father left with her mother. And she's never met her father before. And up until this point at 48, she thought there was nothing to know about her father except that he came over to England as a student and then went back home to West Africa. So to discover these letters from her father is a big shock at 48, and especially at this sort of time in her life. So she's biracial, her mother is white and her father is African. And so she has to decide what she's going to do with this discovery. Is she going to go back to West Africa to find him? What's going to continue from this discovery that is not a spoiler because it happens in like the first chapter. The inspiration for this novel came from people I met who had a similar story. So the person who the book is dedicated to had a similar story. His father came over as a student from Nigeria, had an affair with his mother, and then returned to West Africa and was never seen or heard from again. And yeah, it was just surprising to see how many people had the story, and I just found it intriguing. So yeah, that was the kernel of the story, and that's how Sankofa was born.
Thank you so much. Daphne, could you tell us a little bit about your book?
Sure. First of all, thank you so much to ALA for having me and all of these other wonderful authors that I'm here with today. It's really such an honor. And yeah, as everyone here has said, libraries hold a very, very special place in my heart. I remember my dad would take us after school almost every day. We would do our homework, my siblings and I remember getting older and walking there with my younger siblings and just reading whatever I could get my hands on. I mean, having this free wealth of knowledge, having access to that, it's huge. It makes for a more equitable society in a way that's really, really beautiful. So that's how special libraries are to me. But my debut novel, Brown Girls, follows a group of young women of color, the daughters of immigrants from different diasporas as they come of age in Queens, New York. Queens is the most ethnically and linguistically diverse place in the US, if not the world. It is vibrant, it's eclectic. All of these people from all over the world are our neighbors, and it's also my hometown and a place that I haven't really seen represented in literature. I mean, of course, there's Brooklyn, there's Manhattan, they're glamorous, but Queens is this like funny place, I think, on the margins. And so I really wanted to draw from, of course, memory, from different interviews with some of my best friends growing up, actually, from different diasporas, from Bangladesh, from Dominican Republic, from Haiti, to interview them and just ask them, hey, what are some images and some songs that you remember from growing up? And weave some of their perspectives or be inspired by their perspectives to write the story. And so my debut follows these girls as they try and navigate the cultures and values of
the immigrant families that they're raised in, with the American culture that they grow up in. Some of the girls leave and some stay, and that creates a conflict between them and their families. Is it possible to have dreams and ambitions to leave the place you love behind? Does that mean a betrayal of the place you love? So the book really explores, in addition to those ideas of belonging, it explores the legacies of colonialism and imperialism on people of color in the US. It explores racism. And the story is told through a chorus of women's voices. I use an unconventional point of view, the we, and I really just wanted to write this book not to speak for a place. I think the experiences of women, say in Queens, are very, very different than women of color growing up in Atlanta or London or something like that. But it's really an ode to color, an ode to women of color from this particular community and place. And readers should expect a lot of Rihanna and Mariah Carey lyrics to pop up in the book. So that's what I'll say. Thank you.
So Daphne, how did your background in poetry influence how you wrote your debut?
Yeah, I had studied poetry as an undergrad, and that was my first introduction to creative writing. And I think it really laid the foundation for me in terms of really thinking about like sensory details, images, how to incorporate that into my writing. I was really interested in incorporating other poetic techniques like white space and juxtaposition, associative leaps. Maybe my publishers would kill me for saying this, but I really view the novel really as more of a hybrid text that combines like traditional aspects you see in fiction, such as narrative and character, but fuses it with, I think, this love for language and imagery that you really see in poetry. And as I mentioned before, the novel draws from these interviews that I did over time with different friends to really try and capture that choral perspective. So there's this non-fiction aspect as well, and all of those kind of fused together in this novel. So yeah.
You did touch on the we perspective. So what was your process in deciding to use the we choral perspective? How did you go about trying to capture the we perspective? Why was this important for you to use we?
Yeah, when I first started writing the book, I couldn't see it in any other way. I didn't even bother experimenting with the I or the you in the second person. I felt like it couldn't be any other way. It had to be the we. Again, just as an ode to my friends, to my younger self, to this community of women. And I felt like I could only capture it with the we. But also, I thought the we was really just this elastic perspective that could allow me to capture a range of experiences, of women's experiences within that we. but still spotlight specific women. I hope that's not too confusing for people who haven't read it, but I was really influenced by Claudia Rankine's Citizen. That was just such a powerful book. Also, Buddha in the Attic by Julie Otsuka. She uses the we in a really, really fantastic way. So yeah, I love the we. I think it's underutilized.
Thank you. I have a question for Chibundu. What is it about the Sankofa bird that inspired you?
That's interesting, actually. The title came last.
Ah, okay.
And I must confess, I did not come up with the title. I'm apparently quite bad at titles. I disagree. I'm not going to tell you what the book was called before. But my oldest sister, Dilichi, came up with the title. She also came up with the title for Welcome to Lagos. So this is becoming a trend that I feel like I have to like name my first child after her now or something. Very Rumpelstiltskin. Anyways, it came, for me, I don't plot forward. So like I sort of, as I'm writing the story, I'm discovering. And so it's right at the end of the novel where I sort of realized that this concept of Sankofa is very important. So it's an idea, it's a concept that is represented by a symbol, which is of the bird. And it literally means go back and get it. So the symbol is of a bird flying forward with its head facing backward. And sometimes there's an egg in the bird's mouth, which is sort of symbolizing sort of holding the future in its mouth. And the idea is that you cannot move forward unless you remember what is in your past. And so it's this sort of dual thing of you need to have the forward motion, but you also need to remember what has come before you, etc., etc. And I suppose, so the main character, Anna, is having this sort of Sankofa moment in the story because she's going back to discover who her father is, the history of her father, the culture of this West African country, which is made up in the book called Bamana. She's going back to discover all of this in the novel. And yeah, my original title did not capture all of this. And so yes, my sister had to intervene.
That's so interesting. I also wanted to know what you hope readers will talk about. What conversation do you hope to inspire with your new book?
That's really interesting, actually. What I think would be nice is to hear from people who this is their story. So I listened to a woman on, and it's funny, it's like the thing when you start researching something, then you just suddenly start meeting people who this is their story. So I listened to a woman on the radio over here on a BBC program called Desert Island Discs. And she's a nurse, and she's this really distinguished nurse. And she was like, yes, my father came over as a student, had an affair with my mom, and then returned back to West Africa. And I didn't meet him until I was in my like late 30s. And I was so like, oh my gosh, this is my novel. So I found her. I found somebody who knew her to email her. And she hasn't read the book yet, but it was just like, this is uncanny. This is actually uncanny. So I'm really actually looking forward to hearing from people who sort of this is their story. And I think it's a time in sort of British history. So another thing that sparked this sort of novel was that I did my PhD on a group called the West African Students Union, which was about West African students who came over as students. And so it was interesting to meet the people who were the progeny of these students who had done all this research on their political ideas and XYZ, but they also had sort of lives outside, fighting for independence in Ghana, fighting for independence in Nigeria. They also got busy. Yeah.
That's fantastic. Thank you.
Qian, you touched upon this a little bit earlier, but I was wondering, how was your experience like writing Beautiful Country?
So I often say that I live in extremes. I either don't do something at all or I do it 150%. And this book is kind of an exemplar of that because I spent most of my life hiding the fact that I had ever been undocumented. The shame of having been quote unquote illegal was built very deeply in me and in my parents. But the story just felt like it needed to be told. And I always dreamed about writing it because as much as I loved all of the library books I found, Clifford and Charlotte's Web and Babysitter's Club and Sweet Valley, there was really no one in there like me who was living the life that I was living. So I often said to my mom, I just wish I could know that someone made it through okay, that we could have some hope. And then when the 2016 election happened, I had become a citizen 4 months before the election, 22 years after I first stepped foot in this country. And I felt very much a new privilege and power and responsibility. But I was also at a major corporate firm making partner. So I wrote the first draft of this book on my iPhone, on my notes app, on my subway commute to work. And I just told myself, hey, you give it your best shot. And if you fail, and I entirely expected that I would have failed, like I would have written a half or 3/4 of the book and just given up. At least you gave it a good go. And my rule was that as long as I was on the subway platform or on the train, I was writing. Didn't matter if it was gibberish. I'm a really heavy self-editor. Everything that comes out, if I'm writing with a capital W on the computer, has to be perfect. But on my iPhone, it felt like, texting a friend or just writing a letter to myself. And because these memories were so, some were really great memories, happy memories. The first time I ate pizza, it was beautiful to go back and revisit that. But some of them were really raw and scary and things that I had not let myself think about for decades. And the fact that I had so little time to really question what was going on allowed me to tap into that stream of consciousness and allow that really raw voice to come out. And it was very transformative as well because it allowed me to feel kind of some of the pain and joy and hunger that was too big for my childhood self to feel at the time.
Thank you.
I'm just curious, did you ever physically revisit places that you write about in the book?
I did, yeah. And it's shocking. I think people say this all the time, how quickly New York City changes. And it is shocking, but then you turn a corner and there's that old bodega with some of the same graffiti from decades ago. And it just brings up just new memories. And then the sense of the areas, like I remember the first time walking around Brooklyn, the smell of cheese was something that was very foreign in China because dairy is just not very common in China. And I was like, what is that smell? That smell is everywhere in America. That's the smell of America, that in the subway stations, which is a totally different smell entirely. But yeah, it just brought back a lot of sensory memories. And I also thankfully was nerdily documented pretty much everything in my diary. I was really inspired by Harriet the Spy. So I wrote a lot of minor details that I don't know why any kid would write down at any point, but I did. And thankfully I had some of those to consult.
Great, thank you so much. Tiphanie, a common theme in your book is belonging. Can you talk about how this idea of belonging inspires your work or just this work?
Yeah, belonging is a theme probably in everything I write. And I know some famous dead person who wrote books once said that, we all have one story in us and we're just writing it until we get it right, which we never can. And so we're just doing it again and again. And for me, the question of belonging is probably the central question to everything I work on. I'm from the Virgin Islands and we are officially the Virgin Islands of the United States. And so it's sort of baked into my ethnic and cultural understanding of myself. I'm always sort of wrestling with what it means to belong nationally to the United States, Virgin Islanders, if you're a resident there, don't vote for president or not allowed to vote for president. Our congresswoman is a non-voting member of Congress. So we don't have representation. We belong to the US. We carry American passports. And yet when we come to the United States, to the continent, we come and are viewed as foreigners. We sometimes feel a type of foreignness. So we are wrestling with where we belong constantly. We're effectively a colony of the United States. And yet we are centered in the Caribbean, and even in our own region, our neighbors and brethren in the region sometimes see us as the foreigners because we carry American passports. So we're in this very sort of complex place. And that's existential and political, but it also lands on my personhood. I grew up with my grandparents raising me. My parents didn't raise me. And so I always wrestle with questions of, who do I belong to? It's also something in the Virgin Islands, very Caribbean thing. When people ask you, want to know who you are, they say, who you fa? Who you belong? And it's a very typical thing to try and figure out who a person is, to figure out who they come from. And that's how you can center them. And so it's a constant question for me, who do I belong to? I belong to my friends, I belong to my lover, I belong to my children, I belong to my family, I belong to myself. Like, it's a constant ongoing query for me. I'm taken by the fact that the other women writers in the group are referencing constantly community too, like whether it's my sister named my novel for me, my book is written in the we, like I talked to my mother about writing this book and like thinking through what it might mean to be like an immigrant into this country, like searching for the we. I just feel like sometimes we think of writers as solitary beings, like we write alone in a corner. And I'm in a corner, some of us are in corners physically in this Zoom, and maybe we're alone because of COVID, and yet there's a constant hunger for community. And I don't think most writers do it alone. Even the ones that have a lore about them of being hermits, there's constantly a reaching out. I mean, I think by nature, writers are probably desiring of communication, and that's why we write. And so for me, a lot of it is like, who are my people? Who do I want to talk to? This book in particular is about belonging to a self, to your individual self, what that really means. But my argument is that even the individual self is always a community self, and that we belong to our past selves, to our childhood self, we belong to our parents, we belong to our community, and that all of that arrives with us no matter where we go. Like, we're just carrying it in our very skin, in the curl of our hair, but we're also carrying it in our psychology, in our spirits and our souls. Like, and when we meet each other, we're meeting each other's sisters and girlfriends from high school and, moms. You're meeting my children. They're not physically here, but they're here, So I feel like that's what this book is about, but it's probably what I'm always gonna be writing about too.
Great. And speaking of this book, it's very expansive in geography and timeline. What motivated you to set it this way, to be this expansive story? So
I am, an emotional person in the world, but I'm also an intellectual. I'm a professor at Emory, and I'm a writer who is interested in like what writing is in the world and what it does in the world. And a big part of what I'm doing in this book is also thinking about what stories actually are and what they do for us as humans, whether they're nonfiction or fiction, like what is narrative for us? So each chapter is also a standalone story. So it's a novel, but maybe it's a short story collection. Probably the accurate term would be a novel and stories. And I wanted to think through like, what is the different forms of narrative? What do those forms do for us and help us understand about the state of being a human? So one of the first story or the first chapter is what I'm calling like a road story, which is based somewhat on the form of the road film. That's a very American form of movies where you put someone in a car or a group in the car and they drive across the country. It's very American because we have this expansive nation without borders for a whole continent that you can just drive across, right? There are lots of movies that have this as a premise. Recent movies like Queen and Slim, but also like, there's tons, right? Like we can think of some that end tragically and some that are also super beautiful. And so I took that idea and put it into a story. So once that was the first chapter, it also dawned on me, like, what are the other forms? And are there different parts of America physically that might grow other potential forms and give us potential ways of understanding self? So there's stories that take place in Puerto Rico that have a different kind of form that I think is arising from the landscape of Puerto Rico. There are parts of the novel that take place in Atlanta, which it's sort of absurd that I live in Atlanta because I wrote those versions of those chapters before I had ever lived in Atlanta, but I'd come and did research to sort of figure out Atlanta's landscape, to think about, well, what kind of narratives arise from this physical landscape? That story, or those stories, are a lot about like what it means to be Black, particularly like African-American Black in the United States. And Atlanta, with its incredible civil rights history, seemed like a good place to like grow stories from there. So I wanted to think about like what about the American landscape allows for certain kinds of American narratives. And so that's where it came out. That was sort of an intellectual, nerdy coming. But when I did that, it also created, as I think we all believe, because we believe in the magic of stories, I hope it creates a sort of emotional connection for the reader too, to begin to engage with their own physical space and think about, well, what kind of narratives arise from the space that I'm in now? What stories does this land allow me to tell? And how does that say something about myself and my community? So yeah, it ends up being a narrative of Americanness. An early title of the book was American Love Story. And then I decided to change that. The novel is now called Monster in the Middle, in part because Monster in the Middle also references like the idea of the labyrinth and Theseus in the middle of the labyrinth. And that seemed like a good sort of visual metaphor for America. But I did want to reference like the American physical landscape and see what stories could come out of there and help us know like who we are.
Wonderful, thank you so much.
Alison, do you have any other questions, Alison?
No, I think we might be a little bit out of time.
All right. Okay, so, well, with that, we can bring our session to a close. I want to say thank you to each of you, to each of our wonderful authors for spending this time with us today, and just thank you.
Yes, and thank you so much to all of the attendees at ALA. Have a great day, everyone, and happy reading.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.